Verstappen did not just struggle at Silverstone. He may have exposed the moment he stopped trusting the RB22. Because when Max Verstappen says there is no point racing, after a weekend filled with Red Bull start issues, painful qualifying, 2 separate car problems, worrying telemetry, and a Silverstone disaster, that is not normal frustration. That is a warning. This is the driver who usually bends a race around him. The driver who can turn pressure into pace. The driver who makes even a difficult Red Bull look dangerous. But at Silverstone, the RB22 did not look like a weapon. It looked like a question. Why did the start problems return? Why was there a new problem every time? Why did the telemetry tell such a worrying story? And why did Verstappen sound like the car gave him no real reason to fight? That is what makes this shocking. Because Red Bull can survive one bad qualifying. It can survive one accident. It can survive one difficult race. But if Verstappen's decision on the RB22 came from a loss of confidence in the car itself, then Red Bull's problem is no longer only technical. It is psychological. And once the most feared driver on the grid starts doubting whether his own car can give him a race, every rival suddenly sees the same thing. A crack. A weakness. A chance. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why Verstappen's decision around the RB22 feels so serious, you have to understand what kind of driver Red Bull built this era around. Verstappen is not a passenger. He is not the kind of driver who waits for the perfect car before he attacks. He has made a career out of dragging performance from difficult moments. A nervous rear, a bad balance, a rival closing in, pressure from the pit wall, none of that normally makes him disappear. If anything, it usually sharpens him. That is why Silverstone felt different. Because this was not Verstappen saying the car was slightly off. This was not a normal complaint after a messy session. The source points to a bleak Red Bull verdict, with the phrase, "no point racing," alongside start issues hitting again, 2 problems with the car, an extra painful qualifying, and telemetry that told a worrying story. Those details do not sound like small frustration. They sound like a driver reaching the limit of what he can cover up. And that is the first major problem for Red Bull. For years, Verstappen has been the difference maker. When the car was strong, he made it look unstoppable. When the car was not perfect, he made it look manageable. When rivals got close, he often found enough pace, enough aggression, or enough control to keep the threat away. But a driver can only hide so much. At some point, if the car refuses to give him the response he needs, even Verstappen runs out of magic. That is what the RB22 appears to have exposed at Silverstone. Not a lack of talent. A lack of trust. Trust is the invisible part of performance. Fans see lap times, positions, sectors, and overtakes. Engineers see data traces, throttle maps, brake pressure, and corner speeds. But the driver feels something deeper. He feels whether the car is with him. Whether it will rotate when he asks. Whether the rear will stay planted when he commits. Whether the launch will bite when the lights go out. Whether the car will give the same answer twice. That last part matters most. Because a difficult car can still be raced if it is predictable. A driver can adjust to a weakness. He can learn where the grip disappears. He can change his braking. He can protect a corner entry. He can drive around the problem. But a car that creates a new problem every time is different. That kind of car does not just cost lap time. It creates doubt. And doubt is toxic in a Formula One cockpit. When Verstappen says, or when the source points to the idea, that there is a new problem every time, that phrase cuts deep. It suggests Red Bull was not dealing with one clean weakness. It suggests the RB22 was changing the fight from session to session, forcing the team and driver to chase problems instead of building confidence. That is one of the worst positions a top team can be in. If the issue is clear, you attack it. If the issue keeps moving, you start guessing. And guessing is not how Red Bull built dominance. Red Bull domination came from control. The car had a direction. The driver had confidence. The team understood what it needed. The strategy was aggressive because the platform was stable. Even when rivals got close, Red Bull often looked like it had the next answer ready. At Silverstone, that image cracked. The start issues are a major part of that. A race start is not just the beginning. It can define the whole Grand Prix before the first corner. The clutch bite, tire grip, engine delivery, track surface, and driver reaction all have to come together in one violent instant. If the start goes wrong, the race changes immediately. A driver loses clean air. He gets trapped behind cars. He overheats tires. He loses control of strategy. He has to take risks that were never supposed to be part of the plan. For Verstappen, that is especially damaging, because so much of his power comes from controlling the race early. If he launches cleanly, he can dictate rhythm. If he is forced backward or into traffic, the race becomes messier, hotter, more dangerous, and more vulnerable to outside factors. So when the source says race start issues hit Red Bull again at Silverstone, that word, again, matters. It means the problem did not feel random. It felt repeated. And repeated problems change how a driver thinks before the lights go out. A driver who fully trusts the launch is focused only on attack. A driver who doubts the launch is already carrying a question in his mind. Will it happen again? That question is small, but at this level, small is enough. A fraction of hesitation can change reaction time. A slight lack of confidence can change how aggressively a driver positions the car. A poor launch can force a defensive line, and that one defensive line can compromise the next 3 corners. Formula One races can unravel like that. One problem becomes another. And that is exactly why the RB22 situation feels so dangerous. The source points to more than one issue. Starts. Qualifying pain. Telemetry. 2 problems with the car. A bleak verdict from Verstappen. That is not a single broken piece. That is a weekend where the whole performance picture looked unstable. And Silverstone is the kind of track that exposes instability brutally. The corners are fast. The car is loaded for long periods. Wind can disturb the balance. The driver needs confidence through high-speed sections where lifting even slightly can destroy a lap. If the car is not predictable there, the driver feels it immediately. Silverstone does not let a weak car hide. It asks one question again and again. Do you trust it? If the answer is yes, the lap flows. If the answer is no, the car becomes a fight. And once the car becomes a fight, Verstappen's greatest strengths get redirected. Instead of attacking rivals, he is attacking the car. Instead of managing the race, he is managing problems. Instead of using the RB22 as a weapon, he is trying to stop it from becoming a liability. That is a completely different Verstappen. Not slower because he forgot how to drive. Slower because the car is taking away the conditions that allow him to be himself. That is why telemetry matters so much here. Telemetry is not emotion. It is evidence. It shows where the car was losing time. It shows how the driver was applying throttle. It shows whether he had confidence on entry, mid-corner, and exit. It can reveal hesitation, instability, poor traction, or a car that simply refuses to behave the way the driver wants. So when the source says the telemetry tells a worrying story behind Verstappen's Silverstone struggles, that gives the frustration weight. It means this was not only about a driver being angry after a bad result. The data itself appeared to support the concern. And that is when Red Bull has to pay attention. Because if Verstappen feels the problem, and the telemetry backs it up, the team cannot solve it with encouragement. It needs engineering answers. Real ones. Fast ones. That is where the shock decision on the RB22 becomes so important. A driver's decision on the car is never just mechanical. It is a declaration of what he can and cannot live with. It tells the team whether he wants more stability, more rotation, more launch consistency, more race pace, or less risk. It tells the engineers where the theoretical fastest setup stops being useful because the driver cannot trust it. That is the brutal truth of Formula One. The fastest car on a simulation is worthless if the driver cannot attack with it. A setup that looks strong on paper can collapse in real life if it gives the driver no confidence. The stopwatch only rewards performance the driver can actually use. If Verstappen cannot use the RB22 properly, then Red Bull does not just have a performance problem. It has a translation problem. The car's potential is not becoming race speed. And Silverstone made that visible. That is why the phrase, "no point racing," hits so hard. It suggests that from Verstappen's perspective, the race may have felt compromised before it truly became a fight. Not because he lacks hunger. Not because he cannot handle adversity. But because the car was not offering him a realistic path. That is devastating. Because Verstappen is usually the realistic path. When strategy is hard, he helps rescue it. When the car is nervous, he still extracts time. When rivals pressure Red Bull, he often becomes the solution. But at Silverstone, the problem looked bigger than the driver. And that changes everything for the team. Because once the problem is bigger than Verstappen, Red Bull loses its safety net. They cannot simply rely on him to cover the cracks. They cannot assume his racecraft will cancel the car's weaknesses. They cannot expect him to produce a miracle every time the RB22 gives him another problem. Eventually, the car has to meet him halfway. And that is the first major lesson from this disaster. Verstappen's decision on the RB22 matters because it appears to mark the point where driver talent could no longer disguise car instability. The start issues were not just an inconvenience. The qualifying pain was not just a bad session. The telemetry was not just background data. The 2 problems were not just excuses. Together, they expose the question Red Bull now has to answer before rivals become even more dangerous. Can they give Verstappen a car he believes in again? Because if they cannot, the RB22 will not only cost lap time. It will cost the one thing Red Bull's entire dominance was built on: certainty. But the next layer is where the RB22 problem becomes more dangerous than a bad lap time. Because once a driver loses certainty in the car, the damage spreads into every part of the weekend. It starts before the race even begins. At the launch, a Formula One start looks simple for a viewer. The lights go out, the cars move, and everyone fights into the first corner. But inside the car, that first second is one of the most delicate moments of the entire Grand Prix. The driver needs the clutch, the tires, the engine response, the grip, and the electronics to work together perfectly. If one piece is wrong, the start is gone. And when a start is gone, the race changes instantly. That is why the source pointing to Red Bull race start issues again at Silverstone matters so much. The word again is the threat. A one-off bad launch can be explained. A repeated launch problem becomes something a driver carries in his head before the lights even go out. For Verstappen, that is unacceptable. Because his best races often begin with control. If he launches well, he can choose his line. He can manage the opening lap. He can place the car where he wants. He can turn the race into something Red Bull can shape. But if the launch is uncertain, everything becomes reactive. He has to defend earlier. He has to attack from worse positions. He has to sit in dirty air. He has to fight tire temperatures and traffic instead of building rhythm. And that is how one weakness becomes a chain reaction. A poor start creates traffic. Traffic creates heat. Heat hurts tires. Tire stress changes balance. Balance problems reduce confidence. Reduced confidence costs lap time. Lost lap time creates pressure. Pressure creates risk. And risk, at Silverstone, can become disaster. That is why the accident cannot be separated from the wider weekend feeling. The source does not give enough detail to say the start issue caused the accident, and that should not be invented. But it does show a weekend where Verstappen and Red Bull were already dealing with problems before the disaster became visible. That is what makes this so uncomfortable. The accident may have been the headline. But the warning signs were already there. Painful qualifying. 2 problems with the car. Start issues returning. Telemetry raising concern. A driver giving a bleak verdict. This is how a team loses command of a weekend. Not in one dramatic explosion. Little by little. First the car does not behave. Then the driver starts losing trust. Then the setup choices become compromises. Then qualifying becomes damage limitation. Then the race begins from a weaker place. Then a bad launch or poor balance forces the driver into risk. Then suddenly, everyone asks how Red Bull got here. But the answer was building all along. And that is the second major problem with the RB22. It does not seem to be giving Verstappen one clear weakness to fight. It seems to be giving him multiple problems at once. That is brutal for a driver. If the car is only weak on the straights, the driver can plan around it. If it only struggles in slow corners, the team can set expectations. If the issue is only tire wear, strategy can help. But when the car has more than one problem, the driver has to make compromises everywhere. He cannot attack the lap normally. He has to negotiate with it. Every corner becomes a question. Can I brake as late as I want? Will the rear stay with me? Can I trust the traction? Will the car launch cleanly? Will the balance change when the tires heat up? Will the problem return at the worst possible moment? That kind of uncertainty drains a driver. Even Verstappen. Because his aggression is not random. It is built on feeling. He attacks because he knows what the car will do. He can place it on the limit because he understands where the limit is. If that limit moves from corner to corner, session to session, problem to problem, the aggression becomes harder to use. The car starts forcing him to hesitate. And hesitation is the enemy of Verstappen's driving. Not because he is reckless, but because his strength is commitment. He commits earlier than others. He trusts the car in places others do not. He turns small openings into decisive moves because he does not wait for permission from the race. But the RB22 at Silverstone seemed to take away that permission. That is why the telemetry angle becomes so important. Telemetry is where excuses go to die. If a driver says the car feels bad, people can argue. Maybe he is frustrated. Maybe the setup was wrong. Maybe the track conditions changed. Maybe the rival was simply faster. But when telemetry tells a worrying story, the conversation shifts. Now the problem has evidence. Now the team has to look at where the car lost time, where Verstappen could not apply throttle the way he wanted, where he may have lacked confidence, where the launch or balance weakness appeared, and whether the car's behavior matched what the driver was feeling.